was hoping to talk to you today a little bit about clocks. I'll make sure I pronounce that right, clocks. In particular, a nice old clock I went on eBay and fixed up. I'll show you in a minute. I'm going to start by showing you this first. This is my current bedside alarm clock. If you're anything like me, you probably own several of this sort of thing over the years. Chinese made plastic alarm clock. This was given to me as a freebie. I think it came free with an insurance quote, something like that. So it's been made incredibly cheaply, basically for nothing. I imagine it probably cost the factory a couple of pence to make one of these, which is very impressive actually, I think. A lot of people can be quite critical about things made very cheaply in the Far East, China in this case. You know, I've heard comments banded about like, oh, the Chinese, they make a load of cheap rubbish and stuff, but that's not really very fair, I don't think, because they make what we buy. You know, they're business people, and we're the consumers, we're the ones buying it. They make to spec, and the Chinese are capable of some absolutely phenomenal engineering and craftsmanship. You know, I've seen some absolutely amazing pieces of workmanship come out of China in the past. They're perfectly capable of it, but they're also experts in building things very, very cheaply and mass producing them, if that's what their brief is. And if they've got to produce a load of alarm clocks for a couple of pence each in order to give them away free with insurance quotes, then that's what they do, and they're good at that. But you know, you've got to be realistic. How good a quality do you think it's going to be? I know they're not particularly good quality. They're good for the money, but that's the point. They're good for the money. This particular one actually says when it was made. It says August 2015. It's 2019 now, so it's actually not done too bad. Though it's probably spent half that time in a shipping container somewhere out in the ether between China and the UK. I certainly haven't had it that long. I think I've had it about, I don't know, about a year. And all it's really done in that time is sit by my bedside, and it's just kind of, it's worked, but it's not worked very well. For some reason the top button no longer works. Something inside is broken. That's the snooze button, so every morning when the alarm goes off I push the button, and over the space of a year, you know, it's something inside has snapped. It's not one that can be opened. There's no visible screws anywhere. I've not even bothered looking. The LCD screen itself is not particularly clear. It depends what angle. If you look at it at just the right angle, it's okay. Other than that, if you look at it straight on, it's quite hard to see. Something to do with the polarizing sheet over the front, I would hazard a guess. But it works. It works. It's just not a particularly good quality piece of equipment. Unfortunately, now that the snooze button doesn't work, I'm tempted just to throw it away, which is a shame. I may try and fix it, but the point is, things like these days, they're designed to be disposable. They're designed to be bought very, very cheaply. Quite often these days, when you buy small consumer electronic items, the batteries in them last longer than the device itself. That's just the way of things. But I thought I'd buy a new one, or a replacement clock. But I had a change of heart about just buying the same sort of thing again. I don't know how many alarm clocks I've had over the years. You know, when I wake up in the morning, I like just to look over and see what the time is. You know, that's a fairly normal thing to do, I'd have thought. So it didn't have to be a clock like this. Didn't have to be a digital one. So I had a hunt about on eBay. I wanted something older that's just made a bit better, a bit higher quality. Something that doesn't come from the modern age of consumerism, the sort of throwaway nature, something that's been built by engineers. So, introducing what I bought on eBay. What do you think? It's quite a handsome clock, I think. It's certainly old-fashioned. It's brown for one thing, because it's made out of Bakelite, which is a forerunner to what we consider modern plastic. Bakelite, you don't really see it used anymore. It's a lot more difficult to use and produce than modern plastics are. And it's a kind of resin mixed with what they call wood flour, which is, I would imagine, where the brown comes from, because most Bakelite things that you see have this sort of brown, woody, mahogany look about them. I think that's because of the wood used in their construction. It's a well-made bit of kit. I think it looks quite nice. It's quite retro now. I didn't really know anything about these. I bought it on eBay, not really knowing much about it. It didn't say whether it worked or not. I actually didn't want to buy one that said fully working, no problem, try and test it. One, because they're more expensive, but two, I thought it might be quite satisfying to try and buy one that's spares and repairs or listed as a museum piece or something, and make it work again, or restore it, or recommission it, whatever you want to say. So I bought this one. It didn't cost very much, and the primary problem with it was there was no power cable on it. At some point in the clock's life, someone had just snipped the power cable off with a pair of scissors or pliers, and there was basically just a few little strands of steel hanging out the back, and that was it. So really it had just become a paperweight, and I thought that was a bit of a shame. I took a gamble on it. Maybe there was a lot wrong with it. Maybe it just needed a power cable, but I bought it and it arrived. And also I bought on eBay a length of very thin braided cable. This is brand new. It's not original. And inside the braiding actually is just normal insulated PVC cable. You can buy this cheap on eBay now. A lot of people use it for like lighting, for sort of retro lighting in classy bars and restaurants. It's cheap enough. I used a plug on it that I had anyway, that's kind of quite period. Don't need to say too much about that. But that didn't come with the clock. The clock was just the clock. It's made by a company called Temco, who are based in England. Not to be confused with Timco, the US company known for its military aircraft. This is Temco, Temco. And I've done a little bit of research on the internet about them. Another gentleman on YouTube gave some information about them. The factory was in South London. It's patented. There's various patents on the back. It's got no plastic in it at all because it does predate plastic, but it's a Bakelite case. The front is glass. You've got a metal dial there. You can see the hands. There's a second hand, which is quite nice. There is also a little window that shows whether it's AM or PM. And it has an alarm too if you want to use it. At the back there's an alarm set on there and a snooze button. I didn't really know how old it was, or really very much about it. When I opened it up, there was a date inside of 1939, which seems about right. That might have been a patent date. Not quite sure. There wasn't really any other text around it. It just said 1939. So I'm going to assume that's the year of manufacture. That would make this clock 80 years old, given that it's 2019 now, which is twice as old as I am. When I saw the wiring in the back, basically when the panel came off, you could still see a little stub of the wire inside. It was very old. It was obviously red and black, because that was the colour scheme of the time. It was very perished. So, to be honest, the clock clearly hadn't run for decades, probably at least as long as I've been alive. So it's been sat in someone's attic or on a mantelpiece, or goodness knows what it was being used for I would say at least 40 years, if not more, which seems a bit of a shame. And when I saw how old that was, and therefore how long ago it was the last time this clock was used, I felt sceptical that it was going to work. So I wired it up anyway, with a fresh cable. I plugged it in and watched for a minute or two, and then it burst into life, and it keeps perfect time, no problem at all. I've unplugged it now, it's obviously mains power clock, so it's not running now, but it runs no problem at all. I was really pleased with it. Actually, the most pleasing thing for me was it doesn't go tick tock loudly like I was worried that it might do, because I want it on my bedside cabinet and the noise would drive me mad. But actually it's more or less silent. Even when you put your ear to it, you can barely hear the mechanism working. Inside it's all brass gears. It's very, very well made. I put some fresh oil on the gears, just some light sewing machine oil, just because they looked like they hadn't been lubricated for 80 years, and I doubt that they had. That seemed to help it a little bit, and it's been absolutely fine. It's so shiny and clean and devoid of any damage or wear that it can't really be much different to the day it came out of the shop 80 years ago. And I've no doubt that if it's looked after, someone else can be using this in 80 years time, long after my days. And I think that's simply because of the difference in the way things were made then, and the priorities. I mean, things then were different in the sense that people had less items, I think, but paid more for them. You know, a little bit less consumery than we are today. I would imagine back in the 30s, buying a clock, even a mantelpiece clock like this one, would have been a bit of a day out for the family. You know, to go into your town. There'll be somebody who specialises in timepieces there. You can go in and talk to the engineers and the shopkeepers, I guess, about what they have for sale there, and buy your timepiece. You know, I can't say for sure because I haven't really researched it, but I would imagine something like this back then was probably the equivalent of a day's wages for the principal wage earner of the family, and maybe even more than that, maybe several days. So it was, an important considered purchase. You know, these days you buy an alarm clock, you might be more like 10 minutes wages, for the couple of pounds, to buy something that's come from the Far East. It probably includes postage as well. But back then, these things were a bit more considered. People had less things, but those things they did have were made to a higher standard, I think. It was just the way people shopped then. That's just what the demand was, I suppose. You tend to find a lot of things made then were made, to a better standard, but would have cost more, the equivalent, than what we know today. This clock and clocks of its type predate quartz movements today. If you have a clock rather like this one, it keeps time using a quartz crystal, a tiny piece of quartz crystal, and the electricity is applied to it, and it vibrates at a very precise frequency that can be used to keep the time of the clock. I'm not going to pretend I know all about how that works, but that's what the quart's for. This predates that. This uses a different mechanism. Not simply mechanical, like a grandfather clock might be. It uses the mains electricity that powers it, that comes in, because household electrics in every country, as far as I know, comes in as AC, or alternating current. And without wanting to go too much into the science of that, there is a pulsing nature to it. It's not a constant smooth voltage. It pulses in cycles back and forth at a very precisely set number of cycles per second that's set by all the power stations in that country. They're all synchronized to each other, and how many cycles per second you have does depend on what country you're in. Most countries in the world are set at 50 cycles per second. So it pulses 50 times in 1 second. Some countries, the United States being an example, they pulse at 60 cycles a second, so slightly faster. There are advantages and disadvantages to both systems. You can have it pulse at whatever speed you want. If you go too slow, things like light bulbs will have a very visible flicker to them. Even in the UK, where it's 50 cycles a second, you can't really perceive flashing of like an incandescent light bulb. It's even harder to perceive it in the States, where it's 60 hertz. But the point is that clocks like these actually use the pulsing current that comes in to keep the clock on time, basically. So inside is a little metal motor, and with every pulse of AC electricity that comes in, that motor advances the mechanism sufficiently that the clock advances exactly 1/50th of a second. And by doing that, these things keep very, very good time. It can't really drift out. That's why, even having had this on for a week, it still is absolutely bang on, because the power stations send the AC down very, very accurately. They don't miss one cycle in a whole 24-hour period. It's very precisely done, and it has to be. That's just the nature of the national grid distribution. It's very precisely controlled in that way. What it does mean is you can never run this on a battery. It has to be run on mains, but that's fine. To be honest, I'd rather it run on mains. When you buy my bedside, there's a few sockets. You can just plug it in and leave it. It's easy, never change batteries. And it'll just run day after day, year after year. And I've not used the alarm on it yet. I haven't really figured out how it works. Maybe it doesn't work. No, I've just not tried it. I gave it a clean when I had the back off. But it's, yeah, a very satisfying piece of equipment. You couldn't take it to somewhere like the United States and plug it in, because then it will go too fast, obviously. So you can't export this to a country where the voltage is, the frequency of the AC is anything different to 50 hertz, or it won't work. I think similarly, if you lived off-grid and your house was being powered by a generator, unless it was something like an inverter generator, the cycles per second may vary a little bit. I've got several generators out the back, and the cycles per second, I have got a little meter that will record and tell you what the frequency is. They do vary a bit. Some are about 47, some are a bit higher, 53, 54. Fine for electric lights, kettles, heaters, and most domestic appliances, but for something like this, that would mean it doesn't keep very good time. But providing you're powering it on the mains, it's fine. suppose if you didn't like the brown, you could paint it. I think that'd be a shame. I actually think it's quite nice. It's nicely designed in its quite simple way. It's very Art Deco. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.